Does anybody here remember what I preached last Easter? Nobody? Craig? Me neither. It was about Jesus. I thought somebody would be like, probably about resurrection. But seriously, I was like, what did I preach last year? I don't want to do the same thing over again. And so I had to look up in my files to see that sermon, and I had a computer issue earlier or late last year, and so some of those files are like mysteriously gone. So the last Easter sermon I still had on file was from 2014. And that one wasn't very good, so I decided, let me leave that one alone. And the strange thing is we pastors, and maybe some of us here too, we put a lot of pressure on Easter Sunday, right? We put a lot of pressure on a sermon that no one's going to remember a year later. And it happens every year, right? I used to get frustrated with pastors who would rehash sermons. And they were like, no one remembers. They're going to think it's brand new. Don't worry. Don't worry. But what we do remember, what we do often remember are the times of togetherness, of the fact that we are here, we're connected with people, there is hope and possibility. We hunt for Easter eggs, and maybe there's a funny story connected to the search that sticks with us into the future and becomes part of our Easter legend. Or maybe it's the fact that we pick up tuna cans every year, so part of our Easter mythology is always keeping in mind folks who are hungry and figuring out how to help them. Or maybe it's the playing games together. I remember playing games with people, partly because I have to work really hard at not being competitive. So the energy of focus I have to not beat everybody, like, I got to make sure I don't beat those kids, because that wouldn't be nice. But I remember the interaction because I'm really focused on that togetherness, the shared experience of a thing. And then what I often remember is I have this connection every Easter where I breathe in deep the reality that I belong to a resurrection people. Like, no matter how scary or dark things get, I belong to a resurrection people whom I love and who love me and who love each other. Now, if any of you, let me not make an assumption. How many of you even spend time imagining theological or biblical things? Anybody? That was risky. Thank you. Thank you. So most of us, when we imagine a story like the Easter story on Sunday morning, our vantage point, the eyeballs we're looking through, are somewhere outside the tomb. Amen? Maybe we take on the role of one of the characters, one of the named characters, the ones who were actually good and faithful and showed up Sunday morning. Or maybe we take on an unnamed character who we create to engage with the experience. Or maybe we just go from our present day time travel and drop ourselves into the scene and look through our own eyes. Now, if you've ever imagined Easter through the eyes of someone or your own, have you ever imagined yourself being one of the less than stellar characters? The ones who are hiding and afraid. The ones who lied about knowing Jesus. Or, like the majority of people in that time and place, kind of going, oh well, another so-called self-proclaimed Messiah bites the dust. because it was a common occurrence under Roman occupation. This year, I spent a lot of time wondering, imagining, and praying about what it might be like if I were inside the tomb with Jesus from Friday evening to Sunday morning, in the dark and the quiet, in the mystery. And in my imagination, there he is. He's laid out, he's shrouded. The world outside the stone is going about its busyness, paying no mind to us on the inside. The presence of death is palpable, obviously. And I wonder to myself, is this death the end? Maybe Jesus nor I will get out of this grave. And then I feel a presence next to me. It's not Jesus, he's still laying there. It's an angel. And I say to the angel, "Hi, I'm from the future." And she says, I know. Oh, right, of course you do. Well, you know, the news of Jesus spreads all over the world and becomes what we in the future call Christianity. The angel says, I know. She paused and continued and says, "I know to you it seems like we're going to be in here forever, but we're not, so could you get on with it and ask the question?" Right, sure. So Jesus is about to wake up, right? Maybe it's a spiritual awakening. Maybe it's a physical awakening, like a body resuscitation. And some people believe that this Jesus of Nazareth that's laying in front of us, flesh and blood, rises up alive out of the tomb. Some people believe the spirit of Jesus, his ministry and teachings, are what are remembered and lifted up and brought out of the tomb by his followers. And either way, Jesus of Nazareth becomes Jesus the Christ. Well, which one is it, angel? And the angel says, yes. What do you mean, yes? The angel says, yes, all that and more are true. And that's really all there is to say about it. Don't waste any more of your time on theological trivia. It's fun and all, but it really isn't life-giving. And so I thought, man, I wasted a lot of money in seminary. And I actually say that out loud, and the angel gives me the raised eyebrow. Are you serious right now? And the tension leaves the angel and I feeling a bit awkward as we continue to sit there. And after what feels like an eternity, there comes a faint sound of breathing, and then a throat clearing and slight movement at first that morphs into a grand morning stretch. And then the eyes of Jesus open, as they probably did every morning, and he blinks. Now, I know it's dark inside, and you're wondering, how can you see in the dark? It's my imagination, and I have night vision. Jesus reaches for the snooze button. It's not there. He's not quite ready to wake up. And he blinks some more and opens his eyes, and they're wide with fear. I'm not waking up after a long night's sleep, am I? And he begins to remember what happened. And he begins to wonder, how long have I been in here? What's going on the other side of that stone? Are the angry and armed protesters still out there? Did they follow me here? Have my friends gathered outside to keep vigil? Or have I been forgotten, forsaken, and truly alone? You see, we in the here and now, on the outside of the tomb, we live our lives outside of tombs. That's our goal, right? But we in the here and now, we also know that there are people who have been unjustly yet legally cast into tombs, just like Jesus. And we struggle to hold on to our vantage point from outside. But on Easter, this holy weekend, we have an invitation to enter the tomb with Jesus and to recognize that just as we do it to the least of these, we are in it together. We also enter with the many unjustly yet legally thrown into tombs and have an opportunity to keep vigil in the dark until day breaks, however long it takes. Now, it is my belief as a spiritual person that souls call out to us. But we have lost the skill of hearing them. And even when we try and listen, the static of our industrialized lives drowns out the divine over and over and over again till our ears just can't hear. A real life example in my life, my wife, Bonnie, said a couple of months ago, she's like, I think you're losing your hearing. You should go get a hearing test. And I was like, I hear just fine. And she said, no, you're getting older. And I said, well, yeah, so are you. And she said, we're only a year apart, but I look way older. And she said it a few times, and then my kids actually were like, Dad, you don't hear anymore so well. So I'm like, oh, okay, now there's confirmation. So I go get a hearing test. And I'm waiting. The audiologist does her, they lock you in this. Anybody had a hearing test? It's creepy, right? Right? They put you in this booth, and it's just weird. And my first thought was like, I hope I can breathe in here, because it's like really tight. So I go through the test, and I'm waiting for the audiologist, and I'm fully expecting the audiologist to re-enter the booth and saying, there are a couple of models of hearing aids that would be right for you. And she comes in, and she goes, you're fine. Your hearing's great. The only thing is, like, did you listen to a lot of loud music as a kid? Well, I still listen to a lot of loud music. She was like, yeah, typically if you do that, you went to a lot of concerts, et cetera. There's a frequency range where your hearing does get a bit damaged, and that frequency range is your problem. But you can hear just fine. And I said, but she was like, the truth is, we all learn to screen out noises that are just common. Now, I think she's watching too. She said also when you have some hearing damage in this frequency range, it can become hard to screen out background noise and focus on a particular sound. So our minds just sort of turn it all down, wherever you are. And there's some definite truth to that. So I leave there and feeling relieved, but then also concerned that I'm screening out my beloved's voice. And so I'm still working on that. The test was only a couple of weeks ago. And this paying attention thing, this paying attention with our spiritual cores to the leading of the divine, to the calling out of souls, was portrayed in a really interesting way through, in an unlikely place, a movie that was written by Philippa Langley, a British screenwriter and producer. Philippa Langley, if you don't know who she is, was a member of the King Richard III of England Society. Now, I want to be clear, because I'm going to be talking about her and this work. I do my best to honor and value every human being. But there are institutions that I do not have warm feelings towards, and some institutions I feel disdain for, such as the institution of the British monarchy. Not the individuals. I could probably be good friends with lots of them. But the institution itself hasn't done us a lot of favors. Philippa Langley was a member of this organization, and in 2009 decided she was going to find the remains of King Richard III to try to dispel some rumors this society thought. One, that Richard was a hunchback. They thought the royal family made up that story to kind of vilify Richard and keep him out of the legitimacy of the monarchic tradition. So they start. Philippa reads everything, talks to lots of people, and has a feeling about where King Richard III might be. And she approaches funders at the local university and foundations with her feelings about where Richard was. She was told that feelings have no place in the academy and are never a basis for funding. No one, not the historians, not the archaeologists, not the geologists, who used instruments to see underground that Philippa claimed was the site, under a car park or an American, a parking lot, the instruments detected nothing. And the distrust of Philippa's feelings was confirmed. But somehow she managed to secure funding and permission. So they break through the asphalt of the car park with a big machine. They dig down where the professor said they need to dig down, found nothing. Philippa was regarded as a fool, a failure, a waster of time and money. She was crushed. So here's the part that gets a little interesting. Philippa spent time with King Richard in her imagination. And I get the sense she spent time with King Richard in his tomb. Because a little while later, she came back to the parking lot. The machinery was still there. And she said, we need to dig a little more over here, just off to the edge of where the hole was, just over there. And the crew, the university, it was just heated arguments. And then finally they relented because, after all, she secured the money and was the authority. And so they dig over there, and they find the remains. And it's confirmed that King Richard III was, in fact, what was called a hunchback. His spine was pretty severely curved. But that he was a legitimate part of the monarchy. But as soon as it's found, those jerks at the university swoop in and take all the credit and get all the glory. Sound familiar? Women paying attention to the divine, women showing up at great risk and peril, and men taking all the credit and telling the story. You know, this Easter sermon that none of us are going to remember next year, my invitation to you is to be with your feelings. You know, all of our coaching and training on logic and ration and everything else, Those are important in many settings, but when it comes to spiritual growth and development, set it aside. And like the angel in the tomb taught me, don't waste time with theological trivia that doesn't lead to a more affirming, a more just, more merciful, and more loving world. Just don't. Resurrection is not logical. It is not scientific. It is not rational. The risen Christ is not logical. He is not scientific. It is not rational. Resurrection must be felt and the risen Christ encountered, so live accordingly. Easter calls us to live fully, to love abundantly, to enjoy this life, and share the good news. Amen.